The prophecy stolen from Miriam. In the silence of the desert sands, where the wind carries echoes of forgotten songs, lies a story never completely told. A woman whose name has spanned millennia, but whose words have been shrouded in shadow. Miriam, prophetess, leader, voice that echoed in the exodus of an entire people, remains an enigma, shrouded in mystery. There is something between the lines of the story that was deliberately left behind. Something that, if revealed, could completely transform our understanding of spiritual leadership, the role of women in sacred narratives, and the very fabric of divine revelation. This is not just the story of a forgotten prophetess. It is the story of a prophecy that was somehow removed from common knowledge. The dunes of Sinai hold secrets. Caves near the Red Sea whisper ancient truths. And in scrolls hidden for centuries, fragments of a female voice emerge from the shadows, a voice that some say was purposely silenced. What did Miriam really prophesy? Why haven't his words reached us with the same clarity as the words of his brothers? And even more disturbing, who would be interested in hiding the revelations of one of the oldest known prophetesses? As we walk this journey, prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the origins of prophecy, about the balance between male and female in spiritual traditions, and about the price history pays when it silences half of their voices. The stars over the desert are the same ones that illuminated Miriam's steps more than 3,000 years ago. And in that same ancestral light, we begin to uncover what was stolen, not just from her, but from all of us. If this journey resonates with your spirit, stay with us. There is much more to be revealed in the shadows of time. To understand what was lost, we must first understand who Miriam was and at what crucial moment in history she emerged. We are talking about the period between 1300 and 1200 BC, an era when Hebrew nomads crossed the desert under the promise of liberation and spiritual renewal. Miriam was not a secondary figure. She was the sister of Moses and Aaron, three leaders who together led multitudes through the impossible. But while Moses received the tablets and Aaron received the priesthood, what did Miriam receive? Tradition records that she was a prophetess, but few texts detail her specific prophecies. In Exodus 15:20-21 we read, "Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam answered them, Sing unto the Lord, for he hath exalted himself exceedingly, and hath thrown the horse and his rider into the sea." Here's the first clue. Miriam leads the women in prophetic song after crossing the Red Sea. But the preserved text is brief, disquietingly brief. Scholars of ancient literature point out that this excerpt appears to be a fragment of something larger. The Song of Moses, just before, occupies 17 verses. Miriam's, just 2. Some suggest there was an editorial reduction, a simplification that erased entire layers of female revelation. During the 40 years in the desert, there are scattered mentions of Miriam. It appears in moments of crisis, conflict, transformation, but his prophetic words, those that should be recorded with the same reverence as the words of other prophets, remain absent or fragmentary in the texts that have come down to us. Jewish oral traditions, preserved in midrashim and rabbinic commentaries, suggest that Miriam possessed a unique prophetic gift. Some reports mention that she prophesied even before Moses was called, that it was she who realized her brother's fate when he was still a baby in the waters of the Nile. But why were these narratives not preserved with the same canonical authority? The timeline shows us something intriguing. As traditions were compiled and codified, especially during the period of Babylonian exile, 586 BC, and after the return, there was a process of rigorous selection. Scribes and priests determined what would be preserved. And in this process, certain voices, especially female voices, have been marginalized or reduced to minimal mention. Reflect on this. How many voices have been silenced over the centuries? Leave your perception in the comments. Each perspective enriches this search. The central enigma that confronts us is this: if Miriam was recognized as a prophetess, where are her prophecies? Why does the canon preserve extensive speeches by male figures, but reduce Miriam's voice to scattered echoes? Some say that part of the answer lies in the nature of female oral transmission. While men occupied public spaces of leadership and their speeches were recorded by official scribes, women often prophesied in different community contexts. Around campfires, in women's circles, in moments of healing and celebration. These prophecies were transmitted orally from mother to daughter, but rarely made it into official temple records. Another layer of mystery involves what some scholars call patriarchal redaction. During centuries of textual compilation, those who held the power to write and preserve were predominantly men within rigid priestly structures. There is evidence that certain feminine traditions have been intentionally diminished or reinterpreted to fit a more centralized and hierarchical view of spiritual leadership. Manuscripts discovered at Qumran, near the Dead Sea, contain fragments that mention Miriam's song in more extensive contexts than we find in traditional Masoretic texts. Some Aramaic fragments preserve mentions of visions of Miriam that do not appear in any canonical book. This suggests that there were parallel traditions, alternative texts, expanded versions that were lost or removed. The mystery deepens when we examine the incident recorded in Numbers 12, where Miriam and Aaron question Moses' exclusive authority. The text says, "Did the Lord speak only through Moses? Did he not also speak through us?" This is a direct prophetic claim. Miriam is claiming that she is also a channel of divine revelation. But what follows is a severe punishment. Miriam is stricken with leprosy. Some traditions interpret this as a lesson about hierarchy and submission, but there are those who question, would this story be a way of delegitimizing female prophetic authority? A narrative constructed to justify the marginalization of voices that challenged emerging structures of power. The mystery, then, is not just where Miriam's prophecies are, but why they were hidden, and who benefited from their silencing. Follow this investigation with us. Each step brings us closer to truths forgotten by time. To understand what was stolen, we need to deeply understand those who were at the center of this story, and those who possibly contributed to its erasure. Miriam, the prophetess. She was more than Moses' sister. Some accounts suggest that Miriam was the first to recognize the divine calling in her family, who possessed spiritual insights from a young age. She was a leader of the women of Israel, recognized for her prophetic gift and her ability to inspire crowds through sacred song and dance. But his voice was progressively diminished in official records. Moses, the lawgiver, the central prophet of Exodus, the one who spoke face to face with the divine. But even Moses, in some traditions, recognized Miriam's prophetic authority. Micah 6:4 preserves an interesting memory. "For I brought you up from the land of Egypt, and redeemed you from the house of bondage. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam." Note, all three are mentioned as sent. This suggests shared leadership, not absolute hierarchy. Aaron, the priest brother of both, founder of the priestly lineage. Aaron often appears at Miriam's side in moments of questioning. This may indicate that there were tensions over how leadership should be structured, whether more prophetic, including female voices, or more priestly, predominantly male and hierarchical. The post-exilic scribes and priests. These are invisible but crucial characters. Between 600 BC and 400 BC, after the return from Babylonian exile, there was a massive process of compiling and editing sacred texts. Scribes like Ezra led reforms that centralized worship and codified traditions. In this process, certain narratives were prioritized and others marginalized. There are those who say that the female prophetic voice was one of the victims of this process. the forgotten women. In addition to Miriam, there were other women prophets mentioned briefly. Deborah, Huldah, the wife of Isaiah, but their oracles have rarely been preserved in detail. This points to a systematic pattern of silencing or reduction, the guardians of oral traditions. In Jewish communities, especially among more mystical groups such as the Essenes or Samaritan traditions, there is evidence that expanded versions of Miriam's stories continued to circulate orally. These communities preserved memories that did not enter the official canon. The conflict between these characters was not necessarily personal, but structural. It was about who would have the authority to speak in the name of the divine, who would be remembered, and who would be forgotten. And in this conflict, women, especially those who prophesied outside of official structures, were often erased. If this story touches your heart, stay with us. There are deep layers yet to be explored. Behind Miriam's silencing, there is a deep spiritual conflict that transcends individuals and reaches the very nature of divine revelation. This is not just a conflict over who gets to lead, but over which forms of spirituality are considered legitimate. At the heart of this conflict is a fundamental tension: prophetic spirituality versus priestly spirituality. Prophecy is charismatic, unpredictable, open. Anyone can be chosen as a divine channel. The priesthood, on the other hand, is hereditary, structured, controlled. Authority is transmitted through specific lineages and codified rituals. Miriam represented the prophetic model. His authority came not from priestly genealogy or institutional position, but from a direct connection to the divine manifested through songs, visions, and inspired leadership. This type of authority was, by nature, threatening to emerging structures that sought to centralize spiritual power. Some say that the incident in Numbers 12, where Miriam is punished for questioning the exclusivity of the Mosaic revelation, reflects exactly this tension. It wasn't just about family hierarchy, but about competing models of spiritual authority. Miriam's punishment may have served as a cautionary narrative. Do not challenge the established structure, but there is another dimension to this conflict: the gender dimension. Women's prophetic traditions often incorporated elements that male priestly authorities viewed with suspicion. The use of music, dance, and community rituals led by women were practices that, in some contexts, were associated with fertility cults or Canaanite traditions that monotheistic reformers wanted to eliminate. This created a situation where being a female prophet meant being constantly under suspicion. Their practices could easily be labeled as foreign or impure, even when they were authentic expressions of devotion. Miriam's silencing, therefore, was not just about her individually, but about an entire feminine mode of spirituality. There is also a deeper symbolic dimension. Miriam is associated with water. She is the one who watches over Moses in the waters of the Nile. She leads the song after crossing the Red Sea, and traditions mention that a miraculous well accompanied the Israelites because of her merit. Water in spiritual symbolism represents intuition, emotion, fluidity, qualities often associated with the feminine. The conflict, then, can be seen as a struggle between principles: rigidity versus fluidity, hierarchy versus community, control versus inspiration. And in this fight, the more rigid and hierarchical side won, at least in the preservation of official texts. But Miriam's spirit and what she represented was never completely extinguished. It continued to resonate in mystical traditions, in feminine devotional practices, in communities that kept alive the memory of a more inclusive and charismatic spirituality. What is your intuition about this ancient conflict that still resonates today? Share your thoughts. Every voice matters on this journey. What exactly was lost? What kind of revelations could Miriam have conveyed that have not reached us in full? Here we enter speculative territory, but based on fragments, traditions, and textual analyses that suggest the existence of more extensive material. Certain rabbinic traditions, preserved in the Talmud and Midrashim, mention that Miriam possessed the gift of seeing the future through water. There are reports that she predicted the birth of Moses and his role as a liberator when he was still a child. These narratives suggest that Miriam was recognized as a seer from a young age, someone whose spiritual perception was exceptional. Fragments found among the Qumran manuscripts refer to songs of Miriam in the plural, not just the brief song preserved in Exodus 15, but multiple prophetic songs she sang during her 40 years in the desert. Some scholars suggest that there was a collection of psalms or hymns attributed to Miriam, similar to the Psalms of David, but that it was lost or intentionally excluded from the canon. There are also intriguing mentions in apocryphal and pseudepigraphic texts. The Testament of Miriam is cited in some ancient lists of sacred texts, but no copies survive, or at least none were preserved by the authorities who defined the canon. What would this will contain? Probably revelations about the role of women in the divine covenant, prophecies about the future of Israel, and teachings about shared spiritual leadership. In Numbers 12:2, when Miriam and Aaron question Moses, they ask, "Did the Lord speak only through Moses? Did he not also speak through us?" This is not an empty rhetorical question. It is an affirmation that they also received direct revelations. But where are these revelations from Miriam? Why weren't they registered? Some traditions preserved in Semar communities Itanas, which maintained slightly different versions of the Pentateuch narratives, include references to Miriam's teachings to the women of Israel. These teachings supposedly address themes of ritual purity, spiritual preparation, and devotional practices specific to women. But again, the specific content was lost. There is also the issue of Miriam's well. Jewish tradition states that during the 40 years in the desert, a well of fresh water accompanied the Israelites due to Miriam's merit. When she died, the well disappeared. This is a narrative full of symbolism. Miriam was a source of spiritual life, of mystical nutrition. Their presence sustained the community in ways that went beyond the visible. What revelations did she share around this well? What teachings flowed through her like living water? Some later Jewish mystics, especially in the Kabbalistic tradition, preserved the idea that Miriam represented the Shekinah, the feminine presence of God, the immanent maternal aspect of the divine. If this reflects some ancient tradition, then Miriam's revelations were not just prophecies about future events, but teachings about the multifaceted nature of God, including feminine aspects that have been progressively downplayed in official theology. Stay connected with us as we unravel the mysteries buried in the folds of history. What happens when half the spiritual voices in a tradition are silenced? What are the consequences over the millennia of having lost the revelations of Miriam and so many other prophetesses? First, there is a loss of balance. The most complete spiritual traditions recognize that the divine manifests through multiple perspectives: masculine and feminine, structure and spontaneity, law and grace. When the female voice is systematically erased, what remains is an unbalanced, excessively hierarchical, often rigid and punitive spirituality. This had practical and profound consequences. Over the centuries, Abrahamic religions have developed almost exclusively male power structures. Women were progressively excluded from spiritual leadership roles. Their mystical experiences were devalued or pathologized, and their theological contributions were ignored or attributed to men. There are those who say that Miriam's silencing was just the beginning of a pattern that would be repeated countless times. Think about how many women throughout history have had profound spiritual experiences, genuine visions, brilliant theological insights, but they were never taken seriously, never recorded, never remembered. In Christian tradition, although Jesus included women among his closest followers and first appeared to Mary Magdalene after the resurrection, commissioning her as apostle to the apostles. Subsequent history systematically marginalized women. Gnostic texts that preserved traditions of female leadership were declared heretical. Women who prophesied or led communities were progressively silenced. In Islam, although Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad, was his first follower and crucial supporter, and although Aisha was one of the main transmitters of hadith, women were often excluded from positions of religious authority in the institutional structures that developed. The pattern is consistent. At the beginning, there is recognition of feminine spiritual authority. But as traditions become institutionalized, women are gradually pushed to the margins. Their voices are diminished, their revelations are forgotten, and power structures become almost exclusively male. The consequences of this are spiritual, psychological, and social. Spiritually, we have lost entire dimensions of understanding about the divine. Psychologically, generations of women were taught that their spiritual experiences were less valid, less authentic, less important. Socially, this provided religious justification for women's subordination in virtually all spheres of life. The world in ruins, then, is not just the ancient world where Miriam's prophecies were lost. It is our world, here and now, still dealing with the consequences of this systematic erasure. When we silence half the voices that could guide us spiritually, we all become poorer, men and women collectively. There are also theological consequences. If God speaks through prophets and prophetesses, and we preserve only male voices, what are we saying about the nature of God? Are we suggesting that God has a gender preference, that divine revelation is inherently masculine? These are dangerous distortions that narrow our understanding of the transcendent. If this reflection resonates with you, stay with us. The journey deepens even further. As institutional structures consolidated, the process of erasure became more systematic and intentional. It was no longer just neglect or cultural preference. It was, in some cases, deliberate suppression of traditions that challenged the status quo. During the period of compilation of sacred texts, especially under post-exilic priestly leadership, there were conscious decisions about what to include and what to exclude. Scribes were not just neutral copyists, they were editors with theological and political agendas. Text that did not align with the centralized view of authority was left out or edited for compliance. This becomes evident when we compare different textual traditions. The Septuagint, Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, occasionally preserves slightly different versions of narratives, sometimes including details missing in the Masoretic text. Qumran manuscripts show even more variation. This suggests that there were multiple traditions circulating, and that the process of canonization involved choices that often favored male and priestly perspectives. In 2 Chronicles 34:22, we find an interesting reference to the prophetess Huldah. When King Josiah finds the book of the law and wants to consult it, he does not go to the high priest Hilkiah or the prophet Jeremiah. He sends messengers to Huldah, the prophetess. This indicates that, even in later periods, there was recognition of female prophetic authority. But again, Huldah's specific prophecies were not preserved in detail. Why this pattern? Some scholars point to the political context. As Israel and Judah struggled to maintain identity and cohesion amidst dominant empires, there was a tendency to centralize and standardize religious practices. Diversity was seen as weakness. Dispersed authority was seen as chaos. In this context, independent prophets and prophetesses, especially women who did not fit into priestly structures, were problematic. There is also the issue of competition with other religious traditions. Surrounding cultures often had powerful priestesses and prophetesses. To distinguish themselves from these pagan traditions, the Hebrew reformers may have deliberately minimized female spiritual roles, associating them with foreign practices that should be rejected. This process of dark ascension did not happen all at once. It was gradual, progressive, almost imperceptible to those who lived it. Generation after generation, the stories of women prophets have been told in less detail. His revelations were summarized or omitted. Their names were forgotten, and eventually the very idea that women could be channels of divine revelation became strange, controversial, even heretical in some contexts. By the time we reached the early rabbinic period, 1st, 5th centuries AD, although there was theoretical respect for ancient prophetesses, prophetism had virtually ceased, and no new recognized prophetesses emerged. Religious authority was firmly concentrated in the hands of male rabbis, who interpreted texts written by male scribes about predominantly male revelations. The rise of darkness, therefore, is not just a metaphor. It is a literal description of a process where the light of half of humanity's spiritual voices was gradually dimmed until it almost disappeared. Reflect. What other truths may have been lost in this process? Share your perspective with us. But the story does not end with silencing. Where there is suppression, there is resistance. Where there is intentional forgetting, there is memory preserved in unexpected places. Miriam's light, and that of all the prophetesses whose voices were extinguished, was never completely extinguished. In Jewish mystical traditions, especially in Kabbalah, there is a deep recognition of the divine feminine. The Shekinah is described as the immanent presence of God, often portrayed in feminine terms. Some Kabbalists explicitly connect the Shekinah to Miriam, seeing her as the earthly embodiment of this divine principle. Through these esoteric traditions, something of Miriam's revelations has been preserved, not in literal texts, but in symbolic and mystical understandings. Samaritan communities, which separated from mainstream Judaism, maintained their own versions of the sacred narratives. Although they also do not preserve Miriam's extensive prophecies, her oral traditions often give her more prominence than the Masoretic texts. This suggests that, in different branches of tradition, Miriam's memory was kept alive in different ways. In the early Christian tradition, especially among groups that were later labeled as Gnostic or heretical, there was a more explicit recognition of female spiritual leadership. Gospels such as that of Mary Magdalene, discovered in Nag Hammadi, present women as recipients of revelation, special actions, and as spiritual leaders. Although these texts do not speak specifically about Miriam, they preserve a model of spirituality where women are prophets, teachers, and apostles. Even within Orthodox Christianity, there were women who resisted silencing. Medieval mystics such as Hildegard of Bingen, Juliana of Norwich, and Teresa of Avila had profound visions and wrote extensively about their spiritual experiences. They often faced resistance from male ecclesiastical authorities, but they persisted, and their works survived. In Islam, although women have generally been excluded from formal positions of religious leadership, there have always been female Sufis, mystics, and scholars who have maintained vibrant spiritual traditions. Rabia al-Adawiyya, in the 8th century, is remembered as one of the greatest Sufi mystics of all time. Her poetry and teachings preserve a prophetic female voice that has never been completely silenced. In modern times, there is a conscious resurgence of interest in forgotten female spiritual voices. Feminist scholars recover texts, reinterpret narratives, and rescue marginalized figures. Movements within various religious traditions work to restore women to positions of spiritual leadership. It is a form of resistance that honors Miriam's legacy. There is also something that we can call female collective memory. Through centuries, mothers taught daughters, grandmothers passed down stories, women preserved devotional practices that did not depend on official male authorization. In women's circles, at moments of birth and death, in domestic rituals, here, feminine spiritual wisdom was kept alive even when excluded from official spaces. The resistance of light, therefore, is not just about preserved texts or institutionalization. It's about the persistence of the human spirit, especially the female spirit, that refuses to be completely silenced. It's about the collective intuition that something essential has been lost and needs to be recovered. Today, in Reform and Reconstructionist synagogues, there are rituals that honor Miriam. The Miriam's cup, filled with water, is placed on the Passover Seder table next to Elijah's cup, symbolically recognizing that both men and women carry divine revelation. This is a small act of resistance, a way of saying that Miriam will not be forgotten, that her voice still matters. In feminist Bible study circles, women gather to read between the lines of sacred texts, searching for forgotten women, imagining their untold stories, reclaiming their silenced voices. This is a prophetic work in itself, a work of restoration and redemption. The resistance of light also happens in every woman who hears a spiritual call and responds to it, despite all the structures that say she cannot, must not, is not authorized. Every woman who prophesies, who leads, who teaches, who interprets sacred texts, she's part of the resistance. She carries Miriam's torch, and perhaps in the end, the greatest form of resistance is simply remembering. Remember that there was a prophetess named Miriam who led a people through the desert. Remember that your words were stolen, but your essence remains. Remember that the full story has not yet been told, and that we have a responsibility to keep looking, asking, digging up. The light was never completely turned off. It shines in the margins, in the shadows, in the liminal spaces. And now, more than ever, it is emerging again, not as a threat, but as completeness. Not as competition, but as a complement. The feminine light and the masculine light, together, illuminating the spiritual path of humanity. Stay connected with us as we approach the final reveal of this ancient journey. We now come to the heart of the revelation, to the moment where all the pieces connect and the true meaning of Miriam's stolen prophecy becomes clear. This is not just a story about a forgotten woman. It is a revelation about the very nature of human spirituality and what we lose by silencing half our prophetic voices. The prophecy stolen from Miriam was not a specific set of words that was physically removed from a scroll. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the understanding that the divine speaks through everyone, men and women, young and old, powerful and marginalized. It was a revelation that spiritual authority cannot be monopolized by a hierarchical structure, but flows like water to where it is needed. When we look at the fragments that remain, the brief song after the Red Sea, the mention of the well that accompanied it, the claim that God also spoke through it, we see a pattern. Miriam represented a spirituality of celebration, of community, of nourishment. She led through music, not decree. She sustained herself through living water, not laws set in stone. This does not mean that one way is superior to the other. Moses with the tablets and Miriam with the tambourine, both were needed. The law and the song, structure and spontaneity, the masculine and the feminine. The problem was not that Moses received revelation, but that only his revelation was fully preserved. In Isaiah 11:2, we read of the 7 spirits of God, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. There is a completeness here, a totality. But when we silence voices, when we erase perspectives, this completeness fragments. The prophecy stolen from Miriam, then, is the prophecy of integration. It is the revelation that authentic spirituality requires all voices, all perspectives, all experiences. When we systematically remove the female voice from sacred traditions, we not only harm women, we harm the entire spiritual community. There are those who say that the consequences of this are still evident today, In religions where women are excluded from leadership, we often see spiritual rigidity, lack of compassion, excessive emphasis on rules over relationships. Not because men are inherently less compassionate, but because without the balance of female perspectives, any system becomes unbalanced. The prophetic climax, therefore, is not just looking back and lamenting what was lost. It's looking forward and asking, what will happen when we restore these voices? What will be revealed when we allow women to prophesy, to teach, to lead with full authority? What dimensions of the divine will we see that have remained obscured for millennia? This is Miriam's true prophecy, not specific words she spoke 3,000 years ago, but the eternal principle she embodied. The principle that God speaks through many voices, and we need them all to understand the fullness of divine revelation. And perhaps the stolen prophecy also contains a warning. When we silence voices, when we erase stories, when we monopolize the truth, we don't just harm those who are silenced, we impoverish everyone. We have created a spiritual world that is a shadow of what it could be, a distant echo of the complete symphony that should resonate. Miriam, standing on the shore of the Red Sea, tambourine in hand, leading the women in prophetic song. This preserved image, though brief, carries a powerful truth. She reminds us that there was a time, a moment, when women prophesied openly, when their voices were heard, when their revelations mattered, and if there was such a time, there may be again. If you feel the call of this ancient revelation, stay with us. The final layers are about to unfold. What happens now? How do we live in a world that still bears the scars of this ancient erasure? And most importantly, how do we begin the restoration process? The consequences of Miriam's silencing and that of countless other prophetic women are visible in every major contemporary religious tradition. In many denominations and communities, women are still prevented from occupying positions of full spiritual leadership. They can teach children, but not adults. They can prophesy in informal contexts, but not from the pulpit. They may have profound mystical experiences, but their interpretations are often disregarded if they contradict established male authorities. This creates an absurd situation. Half of humanity is systematically excluded from articulating and interpreting the deepest spiritual experiences of their traditions. It's like trying to understand reality using only one eye, technically possible, but inevitably resulting in distorted perception and lost depth. The psychological consequences are equally profound. Generations of girls have grown up hearing stories about prophets, patriarchs, apostles, saints, but rarely about prophetesses, matriarchs, apostles, saints, or when they do, they are marginalized stories, presented as curious exceptions rather than normative examples. This conveys a powerful subliminal message. The divine prefers to speak through men. Spiritual authority is naturally masculine. Women are objects, not subjects, of the sacred narrative. This message not only affects women, but men as well. Men grow up believing that they are solely responsible for spiritual leadership, the only legitimate channel of divine revelation. This creates an immense burden and also deprives them of the richness that would come from complementary perspectives. But there is hope. In recent decades, there have been significant movements across several traditions to reclaim female voices and restore women to positions of spiritual leadership. In Reform Judaism, a woman rears are rabbis. In progressive Christian denominations, women are pastors, bishops, theologians. In Islam, although more controversial, there are women scholars and spiritual leaders gaining recognition. These movements are not trying to create something new, but to restore something old. The recognition that the divine spirit blows where it will, without restrictions of gender. They are, in a way, completing the work that Miriam began, affirming that God speaks through all voices willing to hear and transmit. Academic recovery is also crucial. Feminist scholars of religion are re-examining ancient texts, searching for women in the margins, questioning patriarchal interpretations, recovering lost histories. This work is not just academic, it is spiritual. It is an act of restorative justice, of historical redemption. There is also a spiritual awakening happening in women's circles around the world. Women come together to study sacred texts, to share mystical experiences, to create rituals that honor the divine feminine. These circles are spaces where the female prophetic voice can emerge freely, without censorship, without marginalization. The final consequences, therefore, are not completely written. We are living in a time of transition, where the old pattern of silencing is being challenged and a new pattern of inclusion is emerging. It is a slow, often painful, always controversial process. But it is necessary. If we want spiritual traditions that are truly complete, that speak to the totality of human experience, that reflect the fullness of the divine, then we need to recover the voices that have been stolen. We need to honor Miriam, not just as a historical relic, but as a living presence. We must allow their spiritual heirs, all women bearing prophetic gifts today, to speak with full authority. The ultimate consequences depend on choices we make now. Will we continue to perpetuate old patterns of exclusion? Or will we have the courage to embrace a more complete, more balanced, truer spirituality? What is your response to this call? How do you see the role of female voices in spirituality? Share with us. This is a conversation all of humanity needs to have. We have reached the end of this journey through the sands of time, following in the footsteps of a prophetess whose words were stolen, but whose spirit was never silenced. We cross the Red Sea of history. We sing with Miriam on the shore of liberation, and we recognize the terrible cost of forgetting. This wasn't just a story about the past. It was a revelation about the present and a call to the future. We have seen how the systematic silencing of female prophetic voices has impoverished entire spiritual traditions, creating imbalances that we still feel today. But we also saw that the light was never completely turned off, that there is always resistance, that truth has a way of emerging even from the deepest shadows. Miriam's stolen prophecy teaches us something essential, that divine revelation cannot be monopolized, that spiritual authority does not belong exclusively to any genre, institution, or structure. The divine speaks through many voices, and when we silence some of those voices, we not only harm those who are silenced, but all of us. As it is written in Joel 2:28, "And it shall come to pass afterward, that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions." Note the deliberate inclusion. Sons and daughters, men and women, young and old. The prophetic promise is universal, not exclusive. Miriam reminds us that there was a time when this promise was more fully realized, when women prophesied alongside men, when their revelations were honored, when their voices mattered. And if there was such a time in the past, there may be again in the future, a future that depends on choices we make now. We deeply thank you for walking with us through this journey, for having had the courage to question accepted narratives, to seek out forgotten voices, to honor stolen memories. This is not easy work. It requires us to confront ancient structures, to question established authorities, to imagine possibilities that many consider impossible or even heretical. But this is precisely prophetic work, to see beyond what is to what could be. Speak truths that others prefer to leave unsaid, honor those who have been forgotten, illuminate paths that have been obscured. Miriam's journey, and our journey with her, does not end here. There are more layers to be uncovered, more voices to be recovered, more revelations waiting in the folds of history. Miriam's well still flows if we know where to look. Their songs still echo if we know how to listen. May you carry something like this journey with you, May Miriam's story resonate in your heart, reminding you that every voice matters, that every spiritual experience is valid, that the divine manifests itself in infinitely diverse forms. May you have the courage to listen to voices that have been silenced, to honor perspectives that have been marginalized, to imagine a more complete and balanced spirituality. And may you, on your own journey, not allow any voice to be stolen, not yours, nor anyone else's. Because every time we allow a prophetic voice to be silenced, we all miss a part of divine revelation. Each time we honor a previously forgotten voice, we all become more whole. Stay connected with us as we continue exploring the mysteries that lie in the shadows of time, uncovering forgotten truths and honoring voices that refuse to remain silenced. May Miriam's light, and that of all the prophetesses whose words were stolen, continue to shine through the centuries, guiding us towards a more complete, fairer, truer spirituality. Shalom. Peace. So be it.